honor is not just about staying subject to the same scenario. David also ran and fled for his life, but he still would never touch, in his words, I won't touch the Lord's anointed. So we actually see him honoring in two distinct ways. And I think there are moments to stay and there are moments to leave, but there's always moments to honor.
Welcome to Dreamers and Disciples. I'm really glad you've joined us today. I've got my friend Brandon Stewart on the show. Brandon is the founder of Leading Second, which is a ministry designed to help church leaders thrive in the second chair. I believe they've helped over 20,000 second chair leaders. He's also the host of the Leading Second podcast, which I've been able to be on a couple times. And he's just a great man with a lot of wisdom that I'm sure you're going to be blessed by today. So Brandon, welcome to the show.
Hey, Wade, I'm so glad to be with you. I'm geeking out about this. I love what you're doing in ministry, and it's an honor to get to contribute today.
Well, you've inspired me for many years now, and I'm glad that I've gotten a closer look recently to your life and to your ministry. And I just want to jump in because what I love about what you do is you're inspiring people to find value and to find worth often in the roles behind the scenes that aren't celebrated as much.
Yeah.
And, so many people want to be on the stage. They want to be in the first chair of leadership. You built your whole ministry around the second chair. So can you just talk about your journey to get there? Because I imagine you had to go on a process in your own heart and your own life to become passionate about this. So start wherever you want to, but give us the origin story of Leading Second.
Yeah, I don't know where the idea came from in me. I don't think it was in put there by any specific person or methodology, but I think I just entered ministry thinking I would be a pastor. I think that's kind of a natural starting point. In fact, I'll tell you the real funny story. The night I felt called into ministry, I was 16 years old at our youth camp. I don't remember hardly anything about the camp. All I remember is my pastor, Pastor Kevin, was the speaker on the first night. And the only thing I remember about his message is his illustration was a packet of cigarettes. And I just remember thinking how odd it was to see Pastor Kevin holding cigarettes. That is my one memory from that night, except that I got this thought in the back of my head. And the thought was, I could do that. And it was, you meaning, preach or pastor. It's the first time I ever related myself to someone in ministry. And I was 16 years old and didn't know anything about it. So I walked up to my pastor after service and I was like, hey, I think I'm supposed to work at the church. I was 16 and I needed a job to pay for car insurance, So I was like, do you need someone to clean? Like, so what do you need? And he goes, I think what you're experiencing is called a ministry. And so, for me, I remember that night because for me, God spoke to me about ministry in the context of watching my pastor do ministry. And so for me, it was just always intertwined. It was always just, I'll pastor one day. But I think over the years, as I moved into employment at the church after Bible school, and as I made my way through my first decade, I had a couple of moments. I remember driving in the car one day where I felt the Holy Spirit ask me, basically, if you never pastored your own church, would you still be faithful? That was the kind of the sense on the inside of my heart. Like, would you still be faithful if you weren't the one in charge? If you spent the rest of your life serving someone else, that was, I think, part of it to me. And I really felt like I had to give the Lord an answer. I really felt like it was a question he was asking of me. And in the car that day, honestly, I said, yes, I would do that. And I don't know why that was a big deal. I remember where I was. I just remember very specifically from God, the invitation to spend my life losing my life in someone else's vision or dream or what God was doing in something bigger than me. So I don't know how it would feel to a lot of second chair leaders out there, but for me, it was from God, and it was around the question of faithfulness. And I just have this feeling, if for every pastor out there, there's how many, dozens or hundreds in some churches, of leaders in the second chair. I just have this feeling there's a lot more people out there like you and me who are going to find themselves in that place with that kind of request from God over their life as well.
I love just that question that you had to wrestle with early on from the Holy Spirit of, what were you in this for? Were you in it to pastor your own church, or were you in it to do ministry,
right,
and to serve God faithfully? So what did that actually look like from you having that moment with God to, launching the ministry that you're currently doing now?
Yeah, I made my way through staff then for a number of years, really starting to try to use my voice to champion the vision of the house. I just actually really made that me. So I was our small groups director. I dabbled in youth ministry at some point, young adult ministry at some point, worship at some point. You know how you do, right? I think I've run everything but the women's ministry at this point, and so my contribution, I think if my pastor were to say it, my contribution to the team was really never about the department that I ran. My contribution to the team was often a lot more about my impact on those around me and being a champion of the vision of the house. And so I would often do leadership teachings for our staff. And I just kind of found my way to being that kind of, or adding that kind of value, I guess, for my pastor to the team. I was in one staff meeting. I was not the one teaching. We actually had a guest speaker in that many of you would know. And when this person was preaching that day, it just got me. And I actually went out in the hallway and scribbled what ended up becoming our leading second creed. I didn't know it at the time, but I just went out and scribbled something that was just in my heart. So God was at work in me in the leadership space. It wasn't really about a department. For me, it was just about God crafting in me a desire to help leaders get it right. I'll tell you how it really happened. I don't know if you know this story or not, but how it really happened was I actually ended up losing my job at the church in late 2011. It was for financial reasons. We were still dealing with the after effects of the 2008 recession. My pastor came to me one day and just said, "I can't pay you. You've done nothing wrong, but we're making cuts." And he also kind of said, I just wonder if there's something else in you. I don't know what that is, but we need you, at least temporarily, we need you to step off of the staff. And what he didn't know from me, I had never told him, but what he didn't know is that for 10 years or so, I had been sitting on a desire to help leaders. So more than just in our staff meetings and stuff, I really had a deep desire in me to work with pastors and leaders. And I figured, well, he just let me go. There's no better time than the present to tell him. So we just kind of had spontaneously, I didn't know this was coming, just spontaneously one of those conversations. And, I shared with him what I was feeling. And he, a meeting that he was dreading having to let a staff member go, was one that actually turned into something that God really used powerfully. So that wasn't launching leading second. That was just kind of that was our exit from staff. I never would have left our staff, by the way. This is kind of worth saying. I never would have left. I was a lifer at that point. And honestly, it was my moment where God had to move us on and had to take us forward, and he had to do it in his way, because I would never have done it.
Yeah.
I was happy, and I was gonna die in that role. I was honestly just content being on our team and with my pastor was all I wanted. So being let go, it was honestly traumatic. It was life-changing. It was life-altering, but I began to realize, no, God is actually at work doing something, because I never would have made that change for myself. And over the next couple of years being on the road, I guess my last thing I'll say really fast is I just started getting asked the same questions everywhere about second chair leadership. And I think that's where Leading Second came from. Was I just realized my passion found a need. And people, churches everywhere were all asking us the same question about the second chair. And so I figured this was a bigger conversation that we needed to have and be part of.
So yeah, I'd never heard that part of your story before. So thanks for sharing that. And I find that so fascinating because your greatest impact, I mentioned earlier, you've worked with 20,000 second chair leaders, came on the other side of something that I imagine had to be pretty devastating in the moment. You said it was traumatic. Can you actually walk through how you processed that with God? Like when you had this conversation with Pastor Kevin, did you sense, okay, God, you're in this, I'm going to trust you? Did you have moments of doubt? Did you have moments of confusion? What did that look like for you?
Oh, A, B, C, and D, all of the above. I needed you is who I needed. I needed the joyful leader coach is who I needed, because it was this crazy mix of so much excitement. Here I was backed by my pastor to represent him and our church around the nation. I mean, potentially around the world. I mean, that's a pretty big honor. Also, at the same time, there was no paycheck. I knew not one pastor. The next morning, I'm at home watching Mickey Mouse Clubhouse with my 4-month-old baby. So the clash was incredible for me. I have the backing and trust of my pastor, and I have no idea how this is going to happen. Now, God did a miracle, and this is why whoever want to enter the space of serving the greater body of Christ need to be really prayerful and mindful, because, wasn't just like I want to be cool and do this thing. It was a God assignment, and God really met me in that moment with provision. There's a whole story there I could tell about God bringing us across the right relationships at the right time, and within about 30 days, this was full-time work for us. Now full-time work needs some context. We slashed every bit of spending in our lives. We moved in with our parents. I mean, we just went crazy on this thing. Like we got our expenses down as far as we could. And, we just went for it. Like we were launching something, like we were planting something, even though we had zero runway to get there. Along with that though, I mean, I had a lot of hard days, a lot of hard moments where I had to come to terms with, why was I one of the ones that got let go? I mean, if you think about that, there was several people that got let go, but there's a lot of people who didn't. So why was I one of the ones chosen? And, why me? I think I was one of the only ones on our executive team. And I had to answer those questions, and I had to do them in a way that was faithful to, first of all, who my pastor was to me. He's an integrous, godly leader. So I had to answer those in a way that didn't turn him into a Saul, in my life. And number two, I had to do it in a way that honors God and that operates in the ways of the kingdom, not the ways of my flesh. Because I had a lot of mornings where I had to answer some really big questions for myself. I had to grieve the loss of a life that I loved. And, working on staff, my wife was still on staff at the time. I had to deal with worthlessness and rejection, so I had to walk through all of those things and somehow find the kingdom in it. And I got there, I did. I'm not going to say it was overnight. I don't remember how long it was, but it was a process of dealing with all at the same time, experiencing the blessing of a ministry that was a dream of ours taking off. So it was just this crazy rush of feeling used by God and yet dealing with that at the same time, that I just really had to find the ways of God and the thinking of God, in it. Yeah. Not just how my flesh wanted to react.
Was there any particular approach you took or tactic or way that you prayed or way that you processed that helped you during those times when something would would kind of rise up? Because I feel like for me, I sometimes will think, oh, I'm good. I've processed everything. And then all of a sudden something just comes out of nowhere. And I'm like, oh gosh, I thought that was dealt with. And I feel like it sets me back on my heels a little bit. What did you find in that season to help you in those moments to kind of pivot your heart back to believing the best, back to trust, back to, or away from bitterness?
Yeah. One thing for me, if I can remember it right, in those days, a huge resource for me, which I just ever so slightly referenced, was Tale of Three Kings by Eugene Edwards. And I referenced Not Turning My Pastor into a Saul. That was an incredible resource. I had just read it a year or so before my exit from staff, and I just think it was God's provision for me. It was a place I needed to hold on to, something I needed to hold on to. I feel like I was really imperfect on that one, if I'm going to be honest. I feel like I'm better now. I feel like I got my wits about me now. I think then it was, I'm a big believer that we have human emotions, and I'm an Enneagram 3-4 if you like all that stuff, which just means my starting point is one of value and worthlessness and shame. That's my journey that I try to come out of. And so I'm a heavy feeler. I feel everything even before I think it. And I think for me, part of the journey in that season was coming to grips with that, of realizing that my feelings could take me to a place that I don't want to go here. And I had to learn the power of renewing my mind as someone who starts in a feeling posture. I mean, I had to remind myself of my pastor's character. I had to remind myself of his integrity. And to this day, it is proven he's a wonderful, godly, integrous leader. But I had to remind myself because my flesh wanted to tell me something different. My feelings, my heart wanted to betray me in those moments. So I don't know if any of that is helpful, but to me, I think I learned for the first time, I was 30, I learned for the first time my starting point on how much of a feeler I was and how much I needed to discipline that side of my life if I was going to have the healthy relationship that I wanted to have with my pastor, long term, and not get bitter in the process.
Well, what strikes me too is, yes, that decision came through your pastor, but if you look at the story arc of your life, that decision ultimately came through God to push you into what
absolutely
he needed you to do. And I think that's the harder thing for me to trust a lot of times is, oh, this decision isn't just coming from a person. Like, God superintends it all and oversees it all. And so how can I actually get to that place of trust quicker in my life than I have in the past?
It would be a long time before I would realize what I'm about to say, that this is like years later. But it hit me one day, when God brought the nation of Israel out of Egypt, he did so by way of the Red Sea. And why did he do that? There were other routes available. This was a large landmass.
Yeah.
There was other routes available. They went the route by the way of the Red Sea at God's leading because he wanted to do something for them where they would always know that he had done it. They would always know he was their deliverer. Now, this is an imperfect equation because I'm not equating my time on staff to Egypt and slavery. So very, very imperfect analogy from that standpoint because I loved it very, very much. But what I was going to say is God did it for me in a way that only he could have done it. And so years later, I realized God gave me a supernatural moment there, a leaving, a moving into something else. He gave me something in a way that I would always know it was him. I would never think it was because of me or even my pastor or any activity of man. I would always know it was God. And honestly, that has given me more peace and confidence in the challenges of leading a ministry and doing what we do now, that has given me so much peace and confidence knowing God brought us here and he's going to take care of us. So I kind of call it my Red Sea moment. I wasn't leaving bondage, but I was going into something. And I think you have to look for God and you have to recognize God's providence, like you said, his leadership in those moments. And that gave me, it would take me a while to get there, but that gave me a lot of peace when I started to see that.
Yeah, I feel like your story is such a perfect example of even what I was trying to communicate through the book, This Dream Is Not For You. Like, you had a dream of serving at your church till the end and being a lifer. And yes, you're still serving your church in a different capacity, but
Right.
God had to say no to that version of your dream to give you the dream for this season.
Yep.
And that usually requires a Red Sea moment, a moment of pain, a moment of trust, a messy transition oftentimes. So maybe we can transition even to second chair leaders that are watching this or listening to this, because I feel like, sometimes a second chair leader, they feel like they have to sacrifice all of their own dreams
Right.
to support the dream of their leader, or they're watching their leader live out the dreams that they might have had once for themselves. Speak to that person. How do they support someone else's dream without sacrificing the specific and unique dreams that God has given them as well? How do their dreams fall up underneath someone else's dreams?
Yeah. Yeah, that's been a major journey for me of taking, this is why I just love your book so much, but taking what was in my heart and figuring out how it worked in our world, in our context. Me being connected with my pastor was a non-negotiable. And I think maybe the first thing I would take a leader to is, has God planted you in your church and in that house? And if so, if that is truly of God, if that's where you're supposed to root your life and your family, then you can trust that God will make a way for it to all work together. The other thing I would say is that every dream, to me, before we even get to our pastors, every dream has a kingdom purpose. And I'm saying that I recognize probably many people listening to this are in ministry in some part-time or full-time capacity, but to the person out there who has a desire to own a business or, to do something, maybe in corporate America or, do something, just realize anything we do in life can have a kingdom purpose and can serve the vision of the house that we're a part of, if you choose to connect it, if you choose to use what you're doing to build the kingdom of God. So any dream, I think, can be connected back to the local church and building God's church. For those in ministry, though, I think for me, I had to realize that my first job was to continue to champion what was in my pastor's heart. So I was out on the road trying to carve out, working with pastors, traveling, whatever that was going to mean. But I still had a responsibility to hold his arms up. And what I found was that he had a need for someone to help champion what he wanted to do with leaders. And I say he, it was we. I saw it as we, but in reality, he wanted to do more through pastors and leaders through our team church conference and network. It was smaller at the time than it is now. And I saw how my passions connected with something that was in his heart and a need that was in his life. And before I asked him to get behind mine, I found a need in his world and said, I want to serve that. I want to be a part of that. So after my time on staff, a lot of my time was actually spent volunteering for Team Church. I'm still on the lead team today of Team Church, but for 10 years, I was the director. And I did that as a volunteer and just served my brains out, getting us out on the road, doing things. In other words, it was sure my life and my ministry have benefited from being a part of that tribe. It's one of the greatest tribes in the world. And I absolutely love it. But that wasn't my motive. My motive in doing that was not how can I do this to build what I'm doing. It was really the opposite. It was I'm going to work and build the ministry that I feel like God has given me and God's called me to. But my first priority is to still find a need in my pastor's life and serve it and fill some gaps. And that's what I did in that time. So I don't know exactly how that would translate to somebody else, but to me, I think my mindset was not about how does serving my church, like how do I leverage that to get something out of it personally? It was the opposite. I really tried to leverage who I was to serve the vision of what I was a part of, even as a volunteer, and just found a need and worked to meet that need. Now, a lot of blessing came from that. Team Church's world expanded, Leading Second's world expanded. It's all been a really, really fun ride, but that was not the motive. The motive was everything I'm doing has to stay subservient to the house and serving the vision of the house. And so I guess anyone in ministry who has a dream to do something for God, I just think you have to trust that if God has planted you there, he will make a way for those things to coexist and actually complement a need that's in your pastor's heart. Now, in my case, my pastor was happy as a clam to have me doing what I was doing. It also did not come with a paycheck. So I was not entitled to a paycheck or compensation, so he was thrilled. And by the way, I just want to be fair to them. They have been so generous and supported our ministry all the way along. So I don't want to paint them unfairly, but I wasn't on staff.
Right.
I was on volunteer staff, right? We know what that is. All of the work, none of the pay, I was in that world, and they've been so gracious to make a space for me, but I still had to come to terms with the fact that I'm volunteering, I'm serving, this is my investment. Mm-hmm. This is not something I'm, receiving from. And I think that God made a way for that, and God would make a way for someone too, again, if you're supposed to be there, if that's your house, trusting that God will make the connection between the thing that's in your heart to a real need in your pastor's life.
We'll get back to the show in just a moment, but I want to personally invite you to join my new mentorship. This is the Joyful Leader Mentorship. It's a journey to help Christians with a public platform avoid burnout and find deeper fulfillment in their private lives. So if you want to know more about the Joyful Leader Mentorship, just go to wadejoye.com/the Joyful Leader, or check the link in the show notes and YouTube description. All right, back to the show. You work with a lot of church staffs, executive leaders. What is a very prevalent tension that you're encountering right now in the church when it comes to being in the second chair? What are you finding people struggling with more now than maybe they used to? What are the pain points? I'd love to learn kind of what you're experiencing.
This is a little newer for me, so I don't know how universal this is, but I'm seeing this a lot right now. I'm seeing the incredible need for clarity right now. I think that we're sick of saying this, but it will go down as one of the great shifts in our life, 2020. That things absolutely changed, essentially overnight for us. And churches have all been on their own journey of recalibrating since then, different parts of the country having different journeys in that. And I think there's been this desire to get back momentum and strength and life in the house. And so I think a lot of places got back to like a let's just get it done, whatever it takes mode. Got back to, come on, let's just let's get back at it. To me, whatever it takes is a great way to start. It's a terrible way to continue. We want to have a whatever it takes spirit, but whatever it takes doesn't build structure and bring clarity. And so I'm actually finding right now a lot of churches that are growing and experiencing life, and God's doing great things, but maybe the structure side is still catching up. Like, what does that need to look like now? And I feel like I'm on the journey to helping second chair leaders find exceptional clarity from their pastors about A, what really moves the needle forward for them right now? B, what is the expectation on their role and how has that changed over time? I don't know if that's terribly universal, but for me, a lot of that's coming my way right now is leaders needing clarity because it's like we want to see the church move forward. We want to help the church win in this season, but something changed along the way. And I don't know that clarity ever caught up with that.
No, I think that's a really great answer. And it's something that I feel like I'm seeing as well in working with churches, that need and that sometimes like this desperate desire for clarity. Like I'll run, in a whatever it takes spirit. I just want to make sure I'm running in the right direction. I want to make sure that our efforts are synced up. I want to know where we're trying to win. So I feel that as well. How can a second chair leader go about seeking that clarity when it's not necessarily coming to them?
I get that question a lot. And I'm a little stumped by that question in this way. To me, getting clarity isn't hard. So it's funny to me that question gets asked so much. It's asked everywhere. How can I get clarity around X? And I try to not be snarky. My answer is talk to your pastor.
Right.
And so I just want to unpack that for a minute. I'm fascinated why we wonder. And I've wondered, and I'm fascinated why I've wondered at times, because sometimes it's just as simple as getting a meeting with pastor or whoever you report to and saying, here's where I'm at. Here's where I'm struggling with clarity. I have a couple questions for you. What matters most to you that I'd be working on right now? Or what would move the ball forward most right now? Just having one of those conversations. It doesn't have to be long. So I think the conversation itself is not terribly complicated. I think what's complicated is we make assumptions about our pastors maybe being unavailable for that conversation. That becomes the struggle. Like, I don't want to take his time to do that. I don't want to bother him. I'll be honest, as recently as last fall, I needed some clarity on something from my pastor. And I called his assistant. I got a short meeting on the calendar. It was not long. And I had questions. I came ready. I took notes. I asked him some of the questions I just mentioned a second ago. And he was great. And he talked out of his heart. And I got a little bit of a mandate, to move forward on something. And so to me, the challenge is not in the conversation. The challenge is to why don't we have that conversation more? And I don't think performance reviews and things like that are terribly effective for finding the answers to that. I think sometimes it's sitting down and getting the pulse. Now, some might be in an environment where you might have more natural connection. And actually, I used to have more natural connection with my pastor. When I was directing Team Church, we had a lot of sync throughout the year. And so I would actually just slip in questions along the way, as I needed to in our natural meetings. But now that I don't direct something with him, I don't have natural sync. We can go quite a bit of time now without talking. So I realized I have to be intentional about this. Mm-hmm. And so just from my context, I had that conversation, and then I got together with him for dinner. I don't do that very often. I said, hey, I just need one dinner a year. How about just one? One where we just sit and sync. If I don't see you any other time of the year, I just want you to know we love you and we're with you, and I just want your pulse. And I have just found my pastor to be so willing to do that, but he doesn't necessarily lead that process. I've had to realize that I have to lead that process of finding clarity. Maybe that's what somebody needs to hear today, is that I think the process is ours to lead. And maybe we're sitting around waiting for it to come, like you said. And I just realized I need to lead it. Mm-hmm. And I need to be proactive without being, really high demanding on him. And in fact, we were at that dinner, and I somewhere in the natural course of conversation, I said, Pastor, I try to be low maintenance for you. And he started laughing. He's like, you're low maintenance. He's like, you're fine. I was like, I try. Yeah, I really try not to be a bother here, but I do need some sync. And I have just found him to be such a willing partner in that, when I approached him that way.
Now, I think there's a lot of wisdom there, because we do have a tendency to think that clarity is going to flow downstream to us.
Right.
And it's our job to, if you don't have clarity about something from anyone, like be proactive and get it. And like you said, there are various reasons why we each might be hesitant to do that. But I think that's a good challenge for people.
Yeah. And if there's a pastor listening, I think we need to realize that your team does need clarity. It's a good thing for clarity to flow down.
Yeah.
That's a healthy thing. So to anyone who does lead someone else, take that, comment in reverse and see that there's a need out there and your team is desiring clarity. So I think that's absolutely a great point, but I think none of us in the second chair should feel like we need to wait around,
Right.
For that. Because I think a lot of bitterness and a lot of confusion and even strife can happen in that space where we're waiting around.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely it's an approach that needs to work both ways, but you don't use the excuse of it not coming to you to not go get it.
Totally.
Now, I think you mentioned assumptions earlier, and I think, in our world today, you hear the word leader, you hear the word authority, the word pastor, and I feel like there's a lot of negative connotations that come with that now. And some of it, is based on really tragic and very painful things that have happened in our culture or in people's lives. But there's also, so many faithful, God-honoring, people-loving pastors that are serving the Lord all across the country that aren't in the news headlines. So how can we help have a more biblical view of authority, of leadership, yet also be wise and not just be a yes man and not just use honor as a excuse to never say anything? I know that's a big question, but I'd love your thoughts on it.
Yeah. I think we have to realize that God's ways are different than the world's ways. First of all, if you and I got on a plane right now and went to England and we attempted to drive our car over there the way they drive their car over there, you're in for a huge crash because this kingdom is different than that kingdom. And I think we have to realize that God's ways are different. And the Bible is confronting and challenging on these issues, and it is different than the ways of the world. And I think that is the starting point that every believer needs to come to. I just read today, Matthew chapter 5, about turning the other cheek, Sermon on the Mount. It's not eye for an eye anymore. It's turning the other cheek. In other words, Jesus was saying, I have a new way that I need you to think about this. So the Bible has something very specific to say on authority, and it's going to be different than the ways of the world. And you have to realize there are things that the world is going to say about authority that on the surface are going to sound logical or sound like something to consider, but they're based on a thinking and a system that is not God's ways of thinking and God's ways of doing things. So we have to start our conversation and our definitions from the context of the word. The world doesn't see sin anymore. Our world sees systems and wants to put everything into a system. And yet the gospel is completely the opposite. So to me, you mentioned ministry. We have tragically seen pastors make some missteps, and we've seen some failures. And I hate it. I hate it for their families. I hate it for those congregations, and I hate sometimes the black eye the church gets as a result. But here's the thing: you have a choice when you see that happen. You can think about it in the world's way or God's way. The world is going to take you down the thought of a system. Those in authority are oppressors. They had to step on someone to get there. That kind of thinking. And so what that's going to lead you to is all pastors are corrupt. All evangelical pastors are. It's going to lead you down a pathway if you follow it, versus seeing sin. Any single one of us are liable to sin. In fact, the Bible tells us to consider the plank in our own eye before the speck of dust in somebody else. I haven't heard that preached on the news lately when it comes to talking about failures in leadership. So do we need to be addressing the very real sin and wrongdoing that's happened in leadership? Absolutely. Every single time. But we have to look at it through God's lens and God's way rather than the world's way, which is just going to tell us a completely different story. So to me, that's like a crux of the issue thing. And if you understand the biblical kind of framework of authority, it will transform the way you can respond to moments where you see leaders get it wrong, that kind of a thing.
That was really, really well said. A lot of clarity there. Moving away from even talking about moral failures, but just the natural tendency that we have, especially in our country, to want to resist authority, to not want to submit. Can you give any kind of good practical guidelines for people of, how do you submit well to a strong leader? And what does honor look like? And how can you still speak your mind and have a voice?
I have 2 words for everybody in second chair leadership. The easiest way to sum it up is study David. Okay. David is an absolute masterclass on this issue. First of all, Saul, David's leader, is trying to kill him. So on your worst day, you don't have it as bad as David. Let's just say that right off the bat. I doubt your life is physically in danger from maybe what you're experiencing, the tough situation you have with someone who's leading you. So that therefore means you can follow David's example, because he gives us a pathway here. Now, David, to me, I see 2 things. I see moments where David honored in staying and moments where David honored in leaving. And I think that's interesting to me, because honor is not just about staying and staying subject to the same scenario. David also ran and fled for his life, but he still would never touch, in his words, I won't touch the Lord's anointed. So we actually see him honoring in 2 distinct ways. And I think there are moments to stay and there are moments to leave, but there's always moments to honor when it comes to those in authority. Now, sometimes leaving may not be leaving a church or a staff. I'm not necessarily saying that. Sometimes it's just removing yourself from a situation or removing yourself from a conversation and just saying, I'm not going to participate in that, but I will not touch the Lord's anointed right now. So I think you have to ask yourself, is my participation in this appropriate, or is my withdrawal from this appropriate right now? But I will always honor and I will maintain that as a standard in my life toward leadership. And David, in one of the moments where he spared Saul's life, keep in mind, this is pre-Jesus. I just mentioned turning the other cheek. This is now back in eye for an eye territory. Remember, this is Old Testament, situation. And God actually, well, the way David's men put it, God brought him a moment where David could have taken Saul's life, and he would have been entitled to be honest, by the ways of their, Old Testament world, eye for an eye. Someone's throwing a spear at you, you get to throw it back. And so he finds Saul asleep, and he could have ended the madness. He could have ascended to the throne. He could have done that. But he chose not to. And this is where he's such a forerunner of Christ in the Old Testament. He didn't do that. He modeled the ways of the kingdom. He echoed, I guess, the ways of the kingdom. And my favorite line, I think, out of anything David said, which is a big statement because David said so many incredible things to us. But he looked at Saul a minute later when he was a safe distance away, and he said, the Lord basically handed you over to me, but I would not touch the Lord's anointed. And then he said this, as surely as I have honored you, may God honor me and deliver me from all trouble. And I cannot tell you, second chair leaders, how many times I have run to those words. I think maybe going back, that's something I learned in those tough moments that we were talking about earlier. I think I learned I will not touch the Lord's anointed. And if I honor my leader, God will honor me. And honor in staying, honor in leaving, it's still honor. And I feel like that's something God blessed big time for me when I found his kingdom in that way in those moments.
I mean, I think that's so well said. And, you can honor by staying, honor by leaving. I didn't have necessarily that language for it, but even when I was praying through leaving staff at Elevation 3 years ago, that was one of the big hurdles for me of honor and loyalty were such big values for me. And I taught that. I'm like, am I being a hypocrite leaving? And I felt what the Lord really spoke to me in that season of wrestling with him is, number one, I had to honor his call on my life first.
Yep.
And be loyal to that first and foremost. And then secondly, honor did not always equal a staff position. Like I could honor just as well in how I left and how I spoke about the ministry and how I was involved. I could honor in my spirit, even if I wasn't on staff anymore.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think that just the way you put that is going to be really helpful for people, that you can honor in the role you're in. And if God moved you someone else, carry that spirit of honor with you. And that is the kingdom. That's the way of Jesus. Not to burn something down after you leave it or burn it down while you're there, but to do everything you can to build it up.
I guess I'll say one more thing on this. I was just thinking about this last night. Remember the story of Solomon? He's prayed and asked God for wisdom. Mm-hmm. And then he has this scenario where two women claim to both be a baby's mom. And we've read that story. It's, I think, a couple different accounts of it. And, in his wisdom, he says, all right, cut the baby in half. You take one half, you take one half, everyone's happy, right? And of course, one mom said, sure, yes, great. And the other mom said, no. Keep the baby together. She can have the whole thing. I just want the baby to live. And that's how Solomon knew who the real mother was. And I think in church life, we have a couple kinds of people in these moments. These are tough moments, but we have people that are willing to tear the baby apart, or people that are willing to take personal sacrifice to keep the baby together. And you really, we say we're all in for our pastors, but honestly, that gets tested in those moments. Will you preserve and keep together the thing that you said you were there for, the thing that you said, I'm all in for this thing, even at personal sacrifice and cost? I mean, I've seen people in transition and in these moments absolutely tear the baby apart in the process. And I've seen people take it on the chin and honor by removing themselves from a situation, but saying, I'm doing it to preserve what God is doing here. And you really see who was the real owner of the thing and the steward of the thing by, I think, the way they respond. So not throwing stones. I've don't propose I've gotten these moments right, but I go back to that thought a lot of, I said I was all in for this. I need to do everything possible right now to keep the baby together, to preserve what God is doing here. And if that means I have to be misunderstood right now, if that means I have to take it on the chin, I will do that. I will do that, because this was never about me. And this was always about God's kingdom. And so that would maybe be different language, but language about honoring in some of those moments where you have to leave or remove yourself from a situation. Are you willing to keep the baby together in the process?
Well, Brandon, I just really appreciate your heart, your wisdom, just your humility to spend your life serving leaders and building the church. How can people continue to follow you? Tell them more about how to get involved with Leading Second.
Absolutely. Hey, it's an honor, Wade, to get to invest, and I love what you're doing. So thank you for being my friend and linking arms in this season. LeadingSecond.com, Leading Second everywhere on Instagram, all the things. The Leading Second podcast is a great place to start for anybody in our world who would want to get a flavor for our ministry. And we also have a subscription site called Leading Second Plus that you can find that has more of our online courses and resources there for the price of Netflix. But bottom line, we're here to walk with leaders and serve you in any way that we can. And it's a real honor to do so.
Well, I highly recommend all of those resources. If you are in the second chair, in church, even in an organization that's not a church, but it's a kingdom-minded business, whatever it is, check out those resources. And Brandon, I actually would love for you, just before we sign off, would you just pray for people who are in that second chair? Maybe they're weary, maybe they're confused, they're trying to figure it out. Will you just pray for God's wisdom and clarity over them?
Absolutely. Father, I thank you today that you know every story, every person watching this today. I thank you that you love them. Thank you that you're writing the story, that you are the author and the finisher of our faith. And so today, Jesus, I just pray whatever they're encountering, whatever they're dealing with, whatever they're walking through, I pray, first of all, you give them great wisdom by your Holy Spirit. I pray you'd help them. I pray you'd help them to find the ways of the kingdom in this moment, God. If they're facing a challenge, may they not react out of their flesh. May they react by the way of the Spirit. May they react in the ways of the kingdom for the glory of your name and for the advancement of your church. I pray that you'd bring them comfort. I pray that you bring them peace. I pray that you bring alignment where there's any confusion, and anything that's broken, I pray you'd heal it today, God. Help them, bless them, God, strengthen them, that your church would be healthy and move forward in this season. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Brandon. And thanks everyone for watching Dreamers and Disciples. We'll see you back here next week.